the present leadership at West Point and these other places decide to go along with what Trump's trying to do. And basically, I mean, I was told that like some of what these schools were doing were kind of above and beyond what Trump had asked for.
Jasper, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
So I want to start with Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense. I want to start with his confirmation hearing. What did Hegseth say about West Point during those hearings?
Yeah, well, there was kind of an under scrutinized moment, but a really important one during that hearing. It was about halfway through, and Tommy Tuberville, who has taken an intense interest in woke ideology, DEI, that sort of stuff, as a senator on the Armed Services Committee, asked Hegseth how he would go about dismantling gender ideology, diversity, uh, critical race theory, things like that within the military. This has, for years now been a major focus of Republicans, is sort of scrubbing, a series of diversity initiatives and sort of, general empowerment of minorities and women in the ranks that sort of kicked off around the Iraq War, early days of the Iraq War. They've been trying to figure this out, and Hegseth basically theorized that the best way to sort of rid these places of diversity was to begin at the service academies, places like West Point, the Naval Academy, the U.S. Air Force Academy. These are sort of the citadels that kick out second lieutenants who become really some of the most powerful, bold-faced names that run the military. Hegseth pledged in that hearing to begin at places like West Point, scrub them quickly, do away with liberal arts, and that's basically what he's done ever since he was confirmed a few days later.
What exactly is his beef with liberal arts and civilians generally in the military?
It's a good question. I mean, he is a product of Princeton, one of the Ivies, a liberal arts school. Hegseth, as a high schooler, had the choice to go to West Point. He got in, but instead he chose to attend Princeton and sort of complement that liberal arts education with an ROTC program there. So I think if Hegseth was being honest with himself, he could understand the benefits of the liberal arts education he got. I mean, he's clearly a very smart individual, knows his history, very eloquent, very charismatic. Um, and by all accounts, he really developed his persona at Princeton. A lot of the instincts that would sort of come to sort of flower today. Um, but at the same time, I think Hegseth developed a certain contempt for civilians once he left Princeton and joined the military. I mean, again, he was in the National Guard, which is defined by the idea of the sort of civilian soldier. It's you're drilling basically once a month, and then the rest of your time is spent in a civilian job. I mean, Hegseth went to Iraq, he went to Afghanistan, but he was working as a banker at Bear Stearns. He was never a full-time troop. So, that history to me indicates that a lot of this is bluster, rhetoric, and that there's ulterior motives here. But I do think as he, was elevated to power to run the Pentagon, he understood that the ultimate check over his authority are civilians, whether that's Congress, whether that's a civilian commander in chief. Trump's certainly not a character particularly interested in reeling him in, but in theory, the ultimate check on military power is civilians. And this is a bedrock rule of most developed democracies. And I think that Hegseth understands that, wants to seize power. He's been, developing a thesis for how he would use power for many years on Fox News and in his books. And so really he just wants to sort of reform the military in his image, one that's focused on sort of brutality, warrior impulses, kick-ass instincts, that sort of thing. And the easiest way to do that is to sort of rid any sort of outsiders or those with a sort of nuanced conception of how the military succeeds, how it operates. And so really, I think it's just about sort of uh, expunging any sort of nuance or potential dissent from his chain of command.
And just for context, can you share a little bit more about the history of civilian professors at West Point and this tension that's kind of always been there between the
Yeah,
military and civilian professors?
absolutely. I mean, West Point as the first military academy was always conceived as a place that created well-rounded military officers. You know, this idea of the officer and the gentleman emerged at West Point. It was sort of pioneered by its you know godfather, a man named Sylvanus Thayer, in the early 1800s. And so there was always this rhetoric around not only military sciences, but liberal arts, the humanities, language, things like that, with the ultimate ideal being that critical thinking skills and sort of a diversified exposure to lots of ideas would ultimately create the ideal officer. Now, in practice, military men are generally often rather not always but averse to that sort of nuance, and so efforts throughout the history of military education in America to inject civilian ideas, to inject civilian professors, have generally been met with pretty intense opposition. This, despite the fact that a lot of well respected military generals have advocated for the introduction and the elevation of civilian professors. Really, the only sort of the major sort of first effort to bring in civilians happened in the late 90s. There was a bill, or rather language, inserted into the annual defense bill in 1993 that, while initially sort of sketching out specific guidelines, ratios rather, of civilian professors in these places, ultimately just sort of expressed a general need for more of them. So basically, sort of, between, I guess, sort of in the Gulf War, the Middle Eastern War era, there has been some work to increase the ranks of civilian professors at these places, though, many are retired military personnel, so the sort of definition of civilian is a little bit muddy there. But there has been some significant solid work over the last 3 decades or so to bring civilians into service academies and other military schools.
And a lot of that is being undone now. Can you tell me about the executive order that Trump signed shortly after Hegseth was confirmed?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that Trump and Hegseth really connected on this issue. Trump himself went to military school, New York Military Academy, as a boy, and has long harbored a love of military power and sort of the accoutrements and
And he
the
he
sort
does
of
love
culture.
service academies. He does focus a lot on service academies, whether
He
it's in his
does, yeah, he
speeches and
does. I mean, if you sort of watch his most recent speech at West Point in May at commencement, you can tell that he's there's a certain sense of honor that he feels there. Like it really is something that I think he gets excited about. Um, and but and yet, I mean, everything was so much of his agenda was stymied in his first term. And he was still sort of figuring out all the levers of power and how everything works, that he never really got around to the service academies. He did end that first term acutely aware of how military brass with integrity could stymie his agenda. And so I think it's no mistake that the first executive order that he issued after being inaugurated concerned the military. Much of it, focused on scrubbing CRT and DEI from the ranks, but there was a specific language in there pledging to work with Hegseth to basically assess the entire service academy system, soup to nuts, and reform it quickly.
you wrote about a professor at West Point, Graham Parsons. Can you tell me about how that executive order affected the trajectory of his career there?
Yeah, sure. Well, Graham Parsons is one of a number of civilian professors who's been there for a while, enjoys great respect from many military peers. And part of that stems, frankly, from the fact that he and others have challenged West Point orthodoxy over their time there. Um, any good military officer, and there are many of them, knows the importance of sort of stress testing ideas and, coming to uh, the best conclusion. Uh, Graham taught military ethics for a dozen years at West Point. Many cadets loved his class. He also did a lot of interesting research around masculinity in the military and sort of how American conceptions of gender and masculinity influence recruiting, influence ideas around service and strength, and all of these other sorts of things. And uh, Professor Parsons had been critical of Trump in his first term. There were some efforts, half-hearted efforts, really, to sort of rein him in during Trump's first term, but there was enough of a sort of system in place to preserve his academic freedom that he didn't get in much trouble.
And I think that
This,
speaks to the differences between the Trump's first term and Trump's second term. We'll find out what happened to Professor Parsons, but in Trump's
yeah,
first term, when he spoke out, he kept his job.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So no, I mean, I think it's the campaign this time around has been swift and unrelenting and highly effective. So, you know, Trump's executive order comes out in his second term. Days later, Pete Hegseth has a teleconference with all of the service academy leaders and orders a very, um, sort of unforgiving assessment of curriculum, books, that sort of thing. Within days, Parsons and everyone else is asked to submit a list of texts that could potentially be in violation of Trump's order, laying out CRT, Marxism, DEI. I mean, these are all sort of buzzwords that are vaguely defined, but often sort of just encompass the liberal arts, in this context at least. Parsons submits his list. He thinks West Point is going to defend him because it's defended him before. Um, that is not the case. Uh, very, within a month, really, of Trump getting in office, the service academies have scrubbed hundreds of books from the library, abolished courses, sometimes, including in the middle of the semester. Um, they are giving the librarians a hard time. They're giving Parsons a hard time. Um, it's very worrying to him. And so he writes an op-ed, which he is not sure sort of the outcome of. He's not sure if West Point will support its publication as they had in the past. This is then further complicated by an academic speech restriction that's instituted, which basically requires all pre-approval from West Point brass for everything from a podcast appearance to an op-ed. Parsons knows that what he's writing is technically in violation of this new policy, which a civilian law professor had in a faculty council meeting declared unconstitutional. Many in these service academies reminded me in my reporting that it is incumbent upon a military officer to defy an unconstitutional order. But the present leadership at West Point and these other places decide to go along with what Trump's trying to do. And basically, I mean, I was told that like some of what these schools were doing were kind of above and beyond what Trump had asked for, which I think speaks, among other things, to the fact that there's been kind of uh, a latent suspicion of civilian professors among some senior school administrators. So Parsons is basically unable to teach class because of these new restrictions on textbooks. He publishes an op-ed that's very critical of how West Point is responding to Trump's executive order. Basically, the flashy line is that the school is now looking to indoctrinate, not educate cadets. I mean, and there are profound consequences from that assertion, should it be true.
Right. And when Parsons comes back to campus, how does the school react?
Well, so yeah, Parsons publishes this. The school is freaking out. They declare him AWOL. He then shows up the next morning to campus, gets some nods of support from civilian and military faculty alike, but then is basically hauled before his department head, a man that Parson deeply respects to this day, but clearly it seems was sort of, I mean, in a place like the military, the hierarchy is so powerful. The chain of command is, deeply respected. And, even if someone like Parsons' department chair quietly supports him, there's not a whole lot he feels he can do. They tell him he's under investigation. They don't really lay out the allegations against him, but basically say, look, if you resign, this will all go away. And that's ultimately what Parsons decides to do.
Do you think that there was some course correcting necessary? Do you think that any of the teachings went too far, or
I mean, it can be enticing to be like, why does a military officer need to learn about, the racism of Immanuel Kant, or, does does a fighter pilot need to know the work of Toni Morrison? I mean, I think technically probably not. Um, but the military academies have long aspired to lofty ideals of, like I mentioned earlier, of creating well-rounded people who can, make good decisions and be respectful of each other and compassionate and humanistic. I mean, everyone, including Pete Hegseth, loves to talk about how Truman's decision in the late 40s to desegregate the military helped kick off the civil rights movement and achieve equity in this country. If the military is seen as a reflection of American society, which it basically is, and officers at places like West Point are supposed to be the very best military officers in the world, I don't understand why they can be exposed to some of these texts. I mean, the fact of the matter is that ROTC officers like Hegseth, who are exposed to liberal arts education, perform far better on the whole than people from service academies. There's a lot of really interesting research about this. The sort of one place where service academy graduates out outdo ROTC graduates is their conceptions of their excellence. They believe that they are the best in all of these surveys. And yet the ROTC officers are far much more nuanced in how they think about things, far less arrogant, far more hardworking, and exposed to civilians who test their assumptions. In the same way, civilians, many of them don't really know how the military operates, may have certain preconceived notions about them that are inaccurate. The military has those as well. And to have a blinkered perspective is just not helpful when building such power.
did the push to rid these academies beyond just West Point of civilian professors also extend to courses like STEM courses, science, technology, mathematics, and how did that affect certain academies?
Hegseth maintained that military history, engineering, STEM courses, they would all be protected from his crackdown. I mean, you can quibble with the legitimacy of a gender studies course in a military academy, but these are sort of bedrock to fighting wars. They always have been. And yet, the campaign against civilian professors has been so sloppy and all over the place and just sort of crude that it has ended up encompassing many civilians who teach military history, who teach engineering. Um, the best evidence for this is at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, which is the most technical of the service academies because, most graduates go on to fly planes, become astronauts, deal with nuclear missiles. They need to have exceptional scientific skills. And yet, many of the professors who teach engineering and other technical science courses at the Air Force Academy are civilians, largely owed to the fact that, civilians are more likely to have PhDs than military officers. It's very difficult for a military officer to get the time off to earn a PhD. The military just doesn't allow it very often. So, unfortunately, of the dozens of faculty who've left the Air Force Academy, many of them have been civilians teaching engineering. And from this has sort of created a domino effect where military professors there who teach engineering and other science classes are leaving as well because they think basically the entire department has been compromised.
What do military professors generally across the academies make of this? I mean, I get that there are different, different perspectives, but to generalize for a second, what do you think the reaction has been from military professors about everything you're describing?
I've spoken to dozens of military professors, and it's pretty clear to me that they all support their civilian colleagues. I mean, certainly there are exceptions to this rule, but it's really the administrators at these places who hold the sort of most animosity. I think a lot of that stems from the fact that many
Animosity
of them
towards
did
who?
towards the civilians. Um, Many of them don't have much teaching experience. I mean, there are permanent military professors at these places who basically end their careers, spend a decade or more teaching. And so through that, they um, earn a respect for civilians. I mean, oftentimes they've relied on civilian professors to help, design their curriculum, or they've turned to them when they need assistance. These professors are more likely to have PhDs as well. So a lot of the military professors at these places do have PhDs, which means they did go to a civilian school and earned this higher degree, and they can appreciate the fact that they, don't know everything and that they've learned a lot from civilians. So it's really just the administrators, few of whom have PhDs or have much real experience in traditional academia, that are the most hostile to civilians.
When does the book come out?
The book comes out Labor Day, next Labor
Does it
Day.
have a title?
I'm sorry, it actually comes on Memorial Day. Yesterday was Labor Day. It comes on Memorial Day. It does have a title. It's called God Forgives, Brothers Don't, which was the West Point football team's unofficial motto for many years until it was reported or connected that God Forgives, Brothers Don't is actually the Omerta Code of Silence for the Aryan Brotherhood, at which point the motto was abandoned.
Interesting. And where can people find you if they want to keep up with your work in the meantime?
People can follow me on Twitter/X. My handle is my name, Jasper_Craven. That's where I post my writing, and we'll be posting about the book.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me. The piece was fascinating, and best of luck as this book reaches the final stages before publishing.
Thanks so much.